Hello, everybody. It's getting towards the end of August 2024. We're about to enter an intense 3 months period before the 2024 election at the early November. We will be told, no doubt, by both sides that this is the most important election in American history. We hear it every 4 years, and no doubt we will hear it again in 2040, 16 years' time. There'll be another election, one hopes. My guest today has a book out, a Silicon Valley satire, a novel about the 2040 election in America. Pedro Domingos will be very familiar with you as the author of The Master Algorithm, one of the big early hits on AI. He's a professor of computer science with a focus on AI at the University of Washington. And he is joining us from Seattle. Pedro, congratulations on the new book.
Thank you.
Is the election of 2040, is that the most consequential election, at least in your book? What's the big deal about what happens in 2040?
The two candidates in the 2040 presidential election are, on the Republican side, an AI. ChatGPT runs for president is essentially the story of 2040, and you can already see the jokes writing themselves. The other candidate is Chief Raging Bull, a fake Lakota chief who wants to abolish the United States of America. So to your question of whether this is the most important election in history, if Raging Bull wins, it's the end of America. If Prezibot, the AI candidate, wins, according to its opponents, it's the end of humanity. So I would say the stakes are fairly high.
The book, Pedro, as I said, it's a novel. You call it a Silicon Valley satire, 2040. Is it also a political satire? Are you focusing more on Silicon Valley rather than American politics? What are you trying to satirize in this novel?
It's both. So I'm trying to satirize the current state of AI to begin with, the hopes, the hype, the fears around AI, the whole way AI has developed and where it's going. The novel revolves around this startup called Kumbaya that is essentially a spoof of OpenAI, and the protagonist, Ethan Bernschwager, who's the CEO, is a spoof of Sam Altman and other like tech CEOs. It is also a satire of the larger tech world. So my inspiration for this was The Bonfire of the Vanities, the satire of the finance industry that Tom Wolfe in the 80s wrote when that was the iconic industry. And I'm trying to do something similar for the tech industry. It is also the story of a presidential election, as we've already touched on. And of course, it's satirizing politics pretty much all the way as well. And the interaction of tech and politics. We're seeing AI coming to politics and politics coming to AI. It also takes place in a near future world where wokeism, for lack of a better word, has prevailed. And so we see what that America looks like. But it's also not the old guard, and the younger generation is rebelling against it. So there's a satire of a lot of different things happening at the same time in this book.
It's ambitious to aspire, I guess, to being Wolfe. Bonfire of the Vanities, one of the classic American novels of the 20th century. You're a professor of computer science, as I said, with a focus on AI. Everyone will be familiar with your book, The Master Algorithm, How the Quest for the Ultimate Learning Machine Will Remake Our World. It's the stuff you teach at the University of Washington. You're an expert. What gives you the credentials to write a novel, a satire? It's a hard thing to do, Pedro.
It is definitely a hard thing to do, and I'll tell you why I wrote it, and maybe I'm more suited to writing it. First of all, there was clearly a great need for a satire of tech world, in the same way that there was a need for Bonfire of the Vanities in the 80s. Somebody needed to write that. And I tried to persuade a number of my journalist friends, for example, whose secret goal is to write the great American novel, that no, that's too hard and it's been done. They should try to write the great Silicon Valley novel instead, because it's an important thing to do, and it's a hanging fruit, if you will, ready to be picked. But I didn't persuade anybody. which was actually very similar to what happened with the master algorithm. So finally, I decided, well, maybe I should write it. Now, my qualifications are, on the one hand, that I know the world of tech and the world of AI very well. So I think I understand AI and what's right and wrong about the current state of things pretty well. I also, partly because I've been doing machine learning for 20 years, and people in various companies have tried to recruit me or use my research. And then in the sequence of the master algorithm, I've talked to a lot of people, again, at companies, large, small, tech of different types, and gotten a view that honestly, I think people inside just one of those companies don't actually get. So that's one side. The other side is that in a previous life, I actually wrote science fiction. I attended the Clarion West, which is this famous 6-week-long writer's workshop where you learn to write science fiction. And many of the most famous and successful science fiction writers today came out of Clarion. So I thought, well, I do know, at least at a basic level, how to write fiction, not just nonfiction. And I know the material, which at the end of the day is the most important thing. So let me take a shot. So I did. There are also some more near-term reasons why I decided to write the novel. But in answer to your question, I think it's hard to find someone today who's well qualified to write this on both the knowing the tech world side and knowing how to write side.
Where do you stand, Pedro, on this debate over AI these days between the existential camp who believe that AI is a true threat to humanity and those who suggest that it's barely even commercial, let alone an existential threat? Are you fearful or excited about the current AI revolution? When did the master algorithm come out?
It came out in 2015.
Right, just before, obviously, before the OpenAI revolution and LLMs and all that.
Indeed. But the AI revolution was gathering steam then with LXNet and all the great results on vision, and deep learning was taking off. So it's been a very rapid growth curve from there to now. But to answer the first part of your question, I think the people who think that AI is an existential threat are seriously misguided. Some of them are good people that I have respect for, but I think on this issue they are completely wrong.
Like who? Who do you respect who's in the existential camp?
Jeff Hinton, who's the leading researcher in deep learning, Yoshua Bengio, who's another leading researcher in deep learning. And I understand where they're coming from. I also understand, I think, why they're wrong. And very much part of my goal with this novel is to awaken people to what dangers about AI are real versus not real. This novel is about the real dangers of AI. It's also making fun of the fake dangers of AI, which are encapsulated in this image of Terminator, Skynet, this big bad AI that is very, very powerful and decides to kill us all. And honestly, I think this is absurd. It is the line of attack that the Democratic Party chooses against Prezibot, and then it turns out it was the wrong line of attack because that clearly doesn't go well, and they should have picked another one. So this is one example of, in the novel, there's a lot of fun being had with a lot of things, but each one of these things is underlying a real point that I'm trying to illustrate for people, one of which is precisely what are the dangers of AI. Now, the real dangers, and I think more related to your the second part of the question, AI has also been overhyped a lot. And particularly in the last AI has always been incredibly prone to overhype, precisely because its potential is so immense and so clear. But in the last couple of years, the hype has run way ahead of reality. Again, 2040 is very much making fun of this and of the difference between what people think AI will do and won't. This is a startup. A couple of students at Stanford think they've solved AI, like a lot of us have over time. They do a startup. It's not going very well. As a demo, they create a presidential candidate. They fine-tune that chatbot to run for president. And this is the story of the disasters that follow. So I also want to illustrate the reality. As much as this is a satire, the science and the technology of AI in the novel are completely real. And in fact, you can absorb a lot of it just by this, quick read of a couple hours, a couple of 100 pages. So I do think that AI is very overhyped right now. I do think that AI has an enormous potential. That's why I've been in the field for the last 30 years. But I think that potential is not something that is going to be realized in the next couple of years. We have made enormous progress in the last several years. That is very exciting, but we are not on the verge of human level AI. So Prezibot is this presidential candidate that sounds pretty smart and human in, for example, a presidential debate, but then it also is prone to malfunctions that no two-year-old child would be.
You mentioned Sam Altman earlier, the current CEO of OpenAI, man who's most associated, I guess, in Silicon Valley now with AI. There's Elon Musk, of course. What about this satire of Silicon Valley? What you trying to satirize in Silicon Valley? I'm down in San Francisco, closer to Silicon Valley than you are. What is it about trouble? What is it about Silicon Valley that you find troubling that you needed to satirize in this novel?
There is just so much, and honestly, it's impossible to do in a couple of hundred pages, but I took a crack, right? The Bonfire of the Vanities is 700 pages, but people don't have the attention spent for that today, so I had to be more pithy, if you will. But the first thing I think that we need to satirize about the tech industry is its pretensions. The reality of Silicon Valley is that most of what goes on there is very mundane. Yes, there is this gold rush and a lot of good things are happening, but you also have, for example, someone who has a startup that does better check recognition, right? Recognition of handwriting on checks, or, I mean, this is a random example. And then they say, we are going to change the world. We are going to make the world a better place, world domination. And whoa, this is just a small improvement. So we have a lot of that, right? And I think it needs to be taken down a peg for the sake of the public's understanding of what really goes on. People need to take the claims and the stories that they see with a grain of salt. And in a way, I'm trying to provide those grains of salt here. That is one aspect. Another aspect, which the book really goes into, is the whole dynamics of Silicon Valley, where there are these startups, there are also these very large companies and the billionaires who in 2040 have become trillionaires who run them, who they have amazing pretensions and messianic feelings about how. So in 2040, there's HappyNet, this very large company that is the everything app, and the guy who founded it and runs it, Dave Newell, says, I'm in charge of humanity's happiness, and he really believes that. Of course, we then find out the ways in which this is really he is both estimate of how much he can control things and of the way in which he wants to control them turns out to be badly wrong. But we see the fight between these trillionaires. There's a chapter called Only We Can Save the Planet, where they fight it out about who has the best scheme for solving climate change and curing a whole bunch of other problems. It ends in a fist fight. And this all illustrates things that actually happen in the tech industry. Then, to abbreviate, there's the AI itself. The thing about AI that is kind of extraordinary is that on the one hand, yes, a lot of progress, very exciting. On the other hand, what's been happening in the AI in the last several years, and OpenAI is the quintessential example, is a comedy of errors. Everything turns out differently from how it was originally designed. The whole success of large language models is like a large language model isn't meant to be doing the things that it's doing. OpenAI was supposed to be created to keep AI open and for the benefit of everybody. And now it's a closed for-profit company. And the list just goes on. Like you have these startups who basically what they do is they try to create a demo to impress people into thinking, either they do this consciously or not, but that's the reality. You create, and again, OpenAI is a big culprit in this. The AI looks a lot better, more intelligent, more human than it really is. And of course, ChatGPT is the greatest example of this. So that's what happens with Prezibot. So I'm trying to make fun of the whole stack of the tech industry, from the startups to the big players, to the different kinds of people, to AI, to the more general issues in the tech industry.
Pedro, you're thinking 16 years ahead. If we go 16 years back from 2024, we're back in 2008. That was the time where social media entrepreneurs, startup entrepreneurs like Mark Zuckerberg, the guys at Ev Williams at Twitter, a number of others, were using similar language to talk about reinventing the world. 16 years later, for better or worse, they seem to have reinvented the world. In 2008, they might have seemed somewhat absurd. Zuckerberg talked about bringing everyone together, social media taking over the world. It has done for many. It's more of a dystopian rather than a utopian outcome. So there's nothing trivial here. I mean, for all the absurdity of the claims of AI startup entrepreneurs like Sam Altman, by 2024, this technology is going to be, if not mature, certainly more radically developed than it is today, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. And again, as much as writing 2040 was a lot of fun for me, and I hope it is for the reading, it is fun for the readers as well, it has a serious point. The goal of 2040 is to give people a better understanding of what AI is and where it's going, and how they should think about it and how it interacts with politics and other things. AI is going to take over the world. I mean, I got into AI in my 20s, in the 80s, because I thought it was going to take over the world, and machine learning in particular. And it is taking over the world, but it's not going to happen overnight. And there will be many, let's call it accidents that happen along the way. I think the problem with AI is not so much that it's not going to take over the world and is overhyped, is that it's not going to happen overnight, and the room for disasters is very large. So I think the biggest danger of AI is not Terminator, is that it's a very powerful technology. And so now we have a very powerful technology in our hands that's going to be even more powerful 10 years from now. And so we're going to screw up on an even bigger scale than we had before. Technology gives the tools to screw up with. And that's very much what I'm alerting people to. The big danger from AI is going to come from its misuses, not only intentional, but just the people screw up, and the AI screws up, the hallucinations, the unreliability, the bugs, the problems. This is what we see in the novel that illustrates what the real dangers of AI. And maybe another thing to say here is the following: is the novel is called 2040, but it isn't really about 2040, the year 2040, any more than Animal Farm is about animals or farming. It's a caricature of today. I'm showing people the world of today, both in tech and in politics and in culture, through a funhouse mirror, if you will. And like a caricature that often lets you see the traits of the person better than a photograph, my hope is that this will help us see the world of tech and society today better than we could, and more easily in a way than we could just by reading the news or reading a more conventional novel.
Where were you born, Pedro? Were you born in the US?
No, I'm originally from Portugal, so I'm originally European.
And are you a US citizen now?
Yes, I am. I have dual citizenship.
Because one of the things that I took away from 2040, and as you say, it's a very entertaining short read, very amusing and provocative, is a disillusionment with American politics, a disillusionment with the nature perhaps of democracy. As you say in the book, on the one hand, the Democrats are taken over by these absurd wokist party, the Native Americans, and the Republicans are running an AI bot. Are you troubled, disappointed by American democracy, this your new home? Is this also driving the narrative? You said you're less fearful about AI. Are you more fearful about the future of America?
Yes, I am. So I am very disappointed with the current state of American politics, and so are a lot of other people. Let me say, however, that America illustrates problems that are much wider than America. I think all of the West and European countries and others as well, they have these problems as well in different guises and variations. They may be sharpest and easiest to see in America, as is often the case with a lot of things. I am an optimist in the long term, but I do think that in the near term, things are going to get worse before they get better. And 2040 illustrates this. So some big disasters happen in the novel, no spoilers, but it does end on a hopeful note. And there's something very important, which then really is central to the novel, which is there are two versions of Prezibot. Prezibot 1.0 is ChatGPT. It's a chatbot like we know it today. We see how that works. But that fails in a number of ways. Among other things, it doesn't win the election. Like they quickly realize that's not going anywhere. The second version of Prezibot 2.0, which Ethan, the protagonist, the CEO, comes to after a long odyssey through San Francisco and all its dysfunctions. Prezibot 2.0 is actually what I think the future of democracy is going to be and should be, and we need to make it happen. So satire aside, and the book then ends on a hopeful note after all the disasters again. No spoilers, but the book ends on a hopeful note. Let's put it that way. And so what is Prezibot 2.0? Prezibot 2.0 is a better form of democracy that AI makes possible that wasn't possible before. Prezibot 2.0 is not some bot generating text somewhat randomly from a database that it learned from. It's being crowdsourced in real time from every American who wants to participate. Prezibot, the body is a robot, but it's actually a whole vast data center where you can talk to it in real time. And then it constructs, it decides what to do in real time by literally talking to millions of people, hearing both what they want and what they think, and doing chains of inference over these things. This is something that wasn't possible before, right? There has always been this dilemma going back to Athens between direct and representative democracy. In direct democracy, in a way, it's better because people decide things by talking with each other in the agora, but it doesn't scale. That's the problem. You can't do it with 100 million people. And so we have representatives who have cognitive limitations. A representative can't know their 70,000 constituents that well, even if that's what they want to do. And then they have conflicts of interest. Well, with AI, your model can be a representative. So you can actually have an agora happening in Prezibot's head, if you will, right? And this is very, very powerful. If we do this right, we can actually have a democracy that functions much better than what we have now. The central plot device in 2040 is Prezibot's kill switch. So, for example, there's this law, which you've probably heard of in California, potentially about to be passed right now, that among SB 1047, that among other things requires AIs to have kill switches, which is, if they decide to kill us or something goes really bad, we can take over. We can turn it off or take control. And so very much Ethan has a kill switch for Prezibot, and then he loses it. And then there's this odyssey where he's trying to get it back and various people fighting for control of it, which of course illustrates the problem with having a kill switch is who controls it exactly. But then the realization that he comes to is that, well, in a democracy, it's not bad to have people fighting over the kill switch. What we should do is give everybody a kill switch. So they turned the panic button, as it's called, into Prezi app, which is an app that everybody can have on their phone, by which they can start to talk to Prezibot. And this is technologically possible now. And I contend that if we do this, we will have a much better democracy than what we've had in the past.
You say that the idea would be to have an agora in a Prezibot mind. So it's our collective knowledge, our collective feelings and desires aggregated in some sort of AI cloud. Wasn't that the promise of the original internet, the early digital idealists, the Larry Lessig's of the world back in the 1990s, and some of the architects of the internet in the 90s, even Tim Berners-Lee? They believed that it would be a kind of agora in a network, not a Prezibot. And that went seriously wrong because of the winner-take-all nature of its economy, and the fact that increasingly power is not in the hands of the many or of everyone, but in a tiny group of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and companies. And why wouldn't the same happen with AI?
Well, it did go wrong. It went wrong because the internet is only half the solution. The other half of the solution is AI. What the internet does that's amazing is it puts everybody's knowledge potentially at everybody's fingertips. But now there's this problem, which is really what AI is solving every day, in Google, on Netflix, on Amazon, on Twitter, etc., which is who sees what, right? I can't read a billion things every day. And there is no solution but AI to solve that problem. The solution that exists today is very bad, very poor AI algorithms controlling Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. And what they do is they create these herds and these, echo chambers and these herd mentalities and mobs and so on. It doesn't have to be that way. We've brought, it's like, think about it this way. we've brought all the information into this collective brain, but there's no real collective brain there yet. The collective brain is really dumb. It's like we have the brain of a fly, or maybe the brain of a reptile, when we should actually have something even better than a human brain, right? And this is what AI is for. So this agora, this greater collective intelligence, the first step is the internet. Until you can have this communication and bring the knowledge together and so on, you're not going anywhere. So without that, you couldn't. People were applying AI to other things before the internet. The field is older than the internet, but it didn't get very far, and for a good reason. But now the internet per se, what it does is it right now what it's doing in some ways is enabling our reptilian brain to go off on its bad instincts. We need to build the next higher level. We need the neocortex of the internet, and that's what AI can provide. And then that vision that they had, which in some ways was correct but was incomplete, then it will come to fruition.
Isn't your vision, though, a little bit of a technocratic utopia? I mean, in the conventions of last week, whether or not you like Kamala Harris, or a few weeks earlier, Donald Trump, they were successfully able to articulate desires, fears. They were able to represent narratives of drama, of individual lives. Can AI really do that, Pedro? Isn't it more just quantifiable? And what we're seeing in your vision would be a kind of utilitarian utopia, an aggregation of what Jeremy Bentham believed, the man who invented the term utilitarianism in the early 19th century, was just an aggregation of pleasure and pain, which trivializes, which oversimplifies the human condition.
Well, fair question. What I'm suggesting in the book is a tech utopia, in the sense that it's saying we have the technology to build a better polity now. So in that sense, it's tech utopia. But I am very much not, and I underline not, unlike many of my friends in Silicon Valley, under the illusion that tech is going to solve the problem all by itself. On the contrary, the whole point of 2040 is that those naive tech ideas get torn apart very quickly. In the first couple chapters of the book, that runs into a big wall. In order to do this, and I don't know if it'll work, but I think we really must try for several reasons. One is that the autocracies are using AI to perfect themselves, so we'd better win that contest, using AI better than they have. But this vision that I have, if you will not happen by technology alone. It will happen with the people and the politics and the sociology. And in fact, the latter part of the book is about the people fighting over precisely the new kind of fighting over President 2.0, right? It's not like Bentham, and we have this in economics and so on. There's this idea that there is an overall utility function that controls everything, and you're correct. There is incredibly oversimplifying and reductionistic. What we really have that's closer to the point is we have more like of a very big game going on, where everybody has their own payoff function. It's not just a game between two people anymore. It's a game between 100 million people. And that game will be fought forever, right? There will be a struggle for control of the AI. There will be a struggle to make it do this versus that versus the other. But this, let me put it this way. We have this notion in AI and in economics of mechanism design. And the US Constitution is a mechanism for making decisions. You elect these people who then have these debates and then they vote. That was the mechanism that you could have then. What I'm saying here is we can have a better mechanism that will not change human nature. It won't make the struggles go away, but it will, at the end of the day, do away with a lot of the pathologies and lead to better outcomes. Now, I think part of what you're getting at, and maybe, let me oversimplify a little bit here, is there's always this thing that happens with new technologies, and it very much happened with the internet. It was like, oh, now the internet is going to be a great educational tool and a tool for rational debate, and we'll have a more perfect society for that. And then it turned out kind of the opposite, right? So will that not happen here? The party conventions are a great illustration of this, because back in the 60s, the party conventions were actually, there was real stuff being discussed there, as it should be. These days, party conventions are commercials. They are 3-day long, vacuous commercials to sell a product. that ain't how it should work. Now, for it to work better, on the one hand, we need to have the technology, which we've been talking about, but equally important, or even more, is that we need to educate and enable the people to not be prey to their own lower instincts. So if I want to hate these people or be amused by that, and I buy these commercials and these political blah blah, right? That political theater works because people let it work. So again, part of my goal as an educator in the master algorithm in this book is to educate people, or help, right? Help people become conscious of how they can serve their own interests, which I have nothing against, better by not falling into a lot of the traps that they keep being laid for them by politicians and others.
In a way, Pedro, listening to what you're saying, you seem to be returning to the great debates after the American Revolution between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and the benefits of direct democracy versus representative democracy. The most articulate, perhaps, of the Federalists was James Madison, who famously said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. But they're not, so we need representative democracy. I tend to be a Madisonian. I'm not so sure about you. Has anything really changed, though? This new technology you suggest will enable us to liberate ourselves from representative democracy, which you see as inadequate, but representative democracy has done a reasonable job over the last 250 years. Many great presidents, FDR, Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln. Is representative democracy really so rotten that it needs to be radically changed by this new technology of AI?
Well, there are two parts to this. One is that things have not changed that much in the last 200 years because the Constitution hasn't. But that's part of the problem, I would contend, is that we have now a constitution that is appropriate for 17th century technology. We should think about what would be a better one that takes advantage of the technology that we have now. So part of why things haven't changed is that they could have, but they haven't. But the bigger point here is the following. There are really, to condense a very big debate into just a couple of things, two big problems with representative democracy. One is the one that I alluded to, is that your representatives are necessarily an imperfect representation of you, both because of their cognitive limitations. They can't know you that well, right? My representative represents 70,000 other people as well. And also, even more importantly, because there's a big conflict of interest, right? At the end, they have their interest at heart more than mine. I agree with you that for the most part, representative democracy has not done a terrible job. I agree with that. It's quite dysfunctional today, but that's not the big issue here. The big issue, which very much the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists were worrying about, and that in some ways has not changed, but in other ways it has, is that should we really empower the people, right? The Anti-Federal, so let me put it this way. One big argument for representative democracy is that you really can't entirely trust the people to make decisions on their behalf. They are too likely to turn into a mob, to be irrational, to do crazy things, like things will go downhill. This is what autocrats would say, right? Autocrats say, like, you can't
although the framers, Madison, Jefferson, they were all highly literate in a historical sense. It wasn't as if they were just pessimists. They knew a great deal about antiquity and also about the Republican experiments of the Renaissance. So this wasn't just a theoretical fear.
No, and I agree with them. This is a real fear. But here's the thing. There is something very important that has changed since their time. Very, very important. People are much more educated now than they were before, and they're better informed. So people are much more
able... Are you serious about that in the age of Facebook and X and TikTok?
Oh, I mean, look, of course. I mean, I think we need to be careful to not fall into glib pessimism. 40% of Americans today have a college degree, which could be better, but it's still a college degree. And the problem is not so much that we have too little information, but that we have too much. And there are, and like Facebook, right, in particular, right? And again, Dave Newell in 2040 is very much a spoof of Mark Zuckerberg. When Mark Zuckerberg says, we bring people together, it's true. A lot of stuff happens, that is not dysfunction. is groups of various kinds, from families to friends to college groups to organizations that want to accomplish something. Social media is an amazing tool for them. So I would contend that the fact that people are more educated now means that they are better able to make decisions on their own behalf. I also have, honestly, fundamentally a better, in some ways, better view of human nature than they did. But also, and I think a lot of people fall into this trap, we are all imperfect, so are the representatives. All of these cognitive biases that the people have, so do I. I don't know what's better for them than they do. I have some expertise on some things, which I believe they should consult on for some things, but they, at the end of the day, know their life better than I do. And here's the key thing, right? And this gets back to the crowdsourcing. I cannot. The appropriate comparison is not between my intelligence and the intelligence of a random person, or between the intelligence of Ronald Reagan and the intelligence of a random person. It's between the intelligence of 400 representatives and the intelligence of 380 million people. No matter how brilliant the representatives are, the total intelligence of the 400 million people is vastly greater. Now, the problem is coordinating that intelligence in the past was basically impossible. And this is what President 2.0 solves, is to make the intelligence of the whole greater than the sum of the parts, whereas before it was a lot smaller.
But intelligence, Pedro, and politics are two different things. I can tell you what I want. I'm sure you can tell us what you want. And everyone knows or seems to know what they want, although often that's why we have therapists we go to who will tell us what we really want. But aggregating all those things together is an impossible task. That's why you need representatives, either at the local or the national level, or presidents who are able to somehow capture the spirit. So Harris seems to be capturing a certain American spirit, progressive spirit of 2024. Trump is doing the reverse. They're both legitimate spirits. I think most of us know which side of the debate we're on. That can't, and it comes back to my point about Bentham, that can't be quantified. That's not what politics is about.
Oh no, on the contrary, that can and will be and is being quantified. I mean, like a presidential campaign, actually political campaigns, they already use AI extensively to do precisely this kind of thing. Obama in the 2012 campaign, he beat Mitt Romney because he used AI better than Romney did. They had this thing running every night called the Optimizer. That was the name, right? And again, the first chapter of 24 is called Optimize America, ! Because that's Prezibot's slogan. And again, this is a spoof of these things. The Optimizer ran every night, figuring out for the swing voters in the swing states what they wanted, what were the most important issues, and what were the talking points by which someone could knock on their door tomorrow and persuade them to flip.
But to be fair, I'm not familiar with that. But to be fair to Obama, had the optimizer said the best way to win votes is to send all the immigrants home or to make racist remarks, he wouldn't have done that.
No, again, I actually know quite a bit of detail about that, but not that particular one. I think they were selecting the issues from a range and the responses from let me put it this way. If that's what the voters wanted, they wouldn't have bothered to talk with them anyway. They would say, like, these are too far gone. We know. So Obama had a platform, right? This is what they were doing they were not adjusting their platform to fit the voters, which you could do. Actually, to your point, right? You're right that there's a level of representation and abstraction that has to be done before you get to decisions. And people like Kamala Harris and Donald Trump do precisely embody. I'm always telling my liberal friends, do not worry about Trump. Worry about what he represents.
And they're telling stories. And the master, your book, your first book on AI was called, of course, The Master Algorithm. The great politicians are master storytellers, the Clintons, the Obamas, the FDRs, the Reagans.
Well, funny you should bring up that point, because precisely in the Master Algorithm, there's a chapter, and this was in 2015, on the application of AI in politics. And the chapter is called A Billion Bill Clintons, because Bill Clinton was the ultimate retail politician who could make everybody think that he was there just doing
that's a dystopia. A billion, I think one is quite enough.
No, exactly. Well, but you're not going to like what I'm going to say next. You can have a Bill. There's only one Bill Clinton. With AI, you can have a billion of them. And in fact, one of the things that happens in 2040 is Prezibot holds a town hall in every town in America at the same time, where with surrogate bodies, he can actually shake everybody's hand at the same time. So you can actually do retail politics like it was never done. But then you also need to bake those into real decisions. And what I submit is that you can make those decisions with AI a lot better than with humans. If you're not convinced by this, let me just put it to you this way. Moravec's paradox is a famous point in AI, which is incredibly important today, is going to be more in the future, which is what seems easy for AI is hard and vice versa. What's easy for humans is hard for AI. Being a construction worker is hard for AI. The harder the job is for humans, like doctor or lawyer, the easier it is and the more reason there is to use AI for it. There is no harder job than being president of the United States. Nobody, no Ronald Reagan, no FDR, even the best presidents are a shadow of what an AI could do. So why not?
This idea of democratizing the bot so that they talk to everyone. I mean, is this radically different from FDR's achievement through the radio of talking directly to the American electorate of the 1930s or 40s? It made him enormously popular, and many Americans saw him as a friend, a relative, a father, almost a god. When he died, there was enormous mourning. Is that dramatically different from your vision of Prezibot in 2040?
Oh, yes, it is dramatically different, and for a very simple reason. With the radio, FDR could talk to everybody, and Prezibot can still do that and does do that, as I just alluded to. But the problem is in the other direction. FDR couldn't listen to all the, whatever number of millions of Americans there were in his time individually at all, and Prezibot can. So the big difference, the dramatic difference, is not going from the politician to the people, isn't going from the people to the politician. The AI politician can hear, and again, with the internet, the internet is the first half of this. With the big difference in the internet is that there is no longer this bottleneck. It was great to have radio and TV and all of that, but it was a bottleneck by which only a few could talk to many. And now with the internet, everybody can talk to everybody. But the problem is that right now, what we have is chaos. And with something like Prezibot 2.0, we can maybe have something better than chaos.
It's fascinating stuff, Pedro. Finally, I have to admit, when I read the book, it's a satire as much on American politics, the current two-party system, and the two parties as it is of Silicon Valley. I thought it was unkinder, if that's the right word, to the Republicans than the Democrats. Sorry, I thought it was unkinder to the Democrats and the Republicans. You kind of eliminated the Republicans by getting them to acquire Prezibot, whereas your satire of the Democrats was pretty brutal in this extreme wokeness. Is that fair? Are you politically perhaps more on the right than the left?
It's funny you should say that, because I have both conservative and progressive friends, and I've noticed, and both as I was writing the book and talking about it, and now when people have been reading it, that there's a pattern. My conservative friends say that my spoof of wokeism doesn't go far enough, so it's too mild. It's really watered down.
Pretty I don't know about that. Anyway, go.
But I mean, I agree. But I'm just stating the facts here, and then we can try to interpret them. My progressive friends, again, this is a common pattern. Say your satire of wokeism goes too far. It's too extreme and loses plausibility, and etc. And now what I have to say to that is the following. Well, first of all, these people to some degree answer each other. But what I was trying to do in the book, and I really strongly believe in this, is a good satire spares nobody. If you just satirize one side but not the other, you're not really doing a good job. I don't want to do that. I'm not a partisan here. I want to make people think. The great satire is going back to Swift and others. They made fun of everybody equally. And now most of the book is spent making fun of the Republicans. Like if you look by number of pages or number of scenes, there's only 2 or 3 scenes that happen in the Democratic camp. So the most of the book is spent making fun of the Republican side because that's where the AI is, right? But then you also have to make fun of the other side. And what I do there is a very long-established tradition in science fiction, which is let us extrapolate things, take their logic at face value, and see where it goes. And for example, the wokeism is encapsulated in this character of Raging Bull who wants to abolish the United States and replace it with a federation of Indian nations. And now, of course, this is a caricature, right? You shouldn't confuse a caricature with a photograph, but it's a caricature of something real. If you listen to a lot of the quote-unquote wokes, they think all of America is, settler colonialism and one bad thing after another, and, we shouldn't be here, blah, blah, blah. Well, what Raging Bull's platform is, the control needs to go back to the tribes. And then if your house is on their tribe, that tribe makes the rules, right? So this is not such a big departure from where we are now.
It's ironic that the Democrats in your dystopia are conservative, and the Republicans are the, if not the progressive, certainly the futurists. Finally, Pedro, I wonder, again, thinking out loud, whether the most likely scenario in the middle of the 21st century will be that the two parties who both seem archaic in an AI age will be joined or perhaps replaced by a real AI party, not a party of AI itself, a Prezibot style intelligence, but a party whose ideology is built around AI and quantification, a true, going back to Bentham, a truly utilitarian party. Is that conceivable, do you think, that AI will eventually become so ubiquitous and reshape everyone as individuals, collectively, economics, education, that politically we will find a party, we will build a new party with new ways of thinking about politics and the world around AI itself?
I don't quite think that's how it's going to turn out. And honestly, the idea of one party of any stripe is a little alarming. I agree with the first part of what you said, which is actually both two-party and multi-party democracy have very big shortcomings, as we all know. And again, that is part of the problem that we have with the current constitution, the current mechanism, is that it forces us into these choices that I have to be in this party where I agree with people more than in the other, but still disagree with them about a lot of things. This is a very bad mechanism, and I think AI will enable us to overcome it. I do not think, neither do I hope, that the result will be a single party that is more AI-based. I think AI will become invisible, like every mature technology. We will just take it for granted.
Like electricity. So we didn't have a party of electricity.
Exactly. So they will all use AI and they all should. But what we will have, and I'm curious to see how that turns out, and I can't predict it, is we will have a lot of different groups. And I have, in op-eds and whatnot, recommended this to both, like, you should have unions, you should have data unions, model unions, you should have data banks, you should have so people of all stripes will aggregate themselves in a very, for example, you could imagine representatives being any 70,000 people anywhere could say, we are going to elect our representative, right? That would be better than the geographic-based system that we have today. So I think we'll see an explosion of alternatives, and 1,000 flowers will bloom. And I don't know how that will turn out, but I don't think it will be a one-party state.
It's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I did an event with my friend Jaron Lanier in Berkeley on what he calls data dignity. So there's a lot to discuss. Pedro Domingos, the author of 2040, a Silicon Valley satire. Interesting, important conversation beyond all the satire. One thing I hope, Pedro, is it won't be 2040 till we get you back on the show. Thank you so much, and congratulations on the new book.